Tom Wheeler, a longtime lobbyist for the cable and wireless industries, to head the FCC. Scott Horsley, NPR News, the White House.
Wrapping up its two-day meeting in Washington, the interest rate-setting arm of the Federal Reserve says it is sticking by its plan to buy $85 billion worth of bonds a month in an effort to jumpstart the economy. The Fed in its end-of-meeting statement describing the economy as expanding, but only modestly. John Sylvia is chief economist at Wells Fargo. He says the Fed may have been taken somewhat by surprise by the expiration of payroll tax cuts and reductions in government spending.
It does tell me that probably the extent of this fiscal policy being restrictive caught the Fed a little bit off guard. They really weren't ready to see the impact that it evidently did have, let's say, in terms of retail sales or the manufacturing numbers that have come out in the last month.
The Fed says it will continue to buy assets until the jobs picture improves. Private sector was still adding jobs last month, though the slowest pace in 7 months. The private payroll processing firm ADP says the economy added just 199,000 private sector jobs. On Wall Street today, the Dow Jones Industrial Average fell 138 points. You're listening to NPR News.
Support for NPR comes from Delta Airlines, with first-class seating on 2-class regional jets. Tickets available at delta.com. Delta, keep climbing.
With KUNC News, I'm Emily Boyer. Good afternoon. It's 4:04. Heavy wet spring snow is wreaking havoc on trees and power lines in northern Colorado today. In Fort Collins, crews were dispatched to remove downed tree branches which were blocking some roadways. Mark Jackson is Deputy Director of Planning, Development, and Transportation for the city.
The pace is warming up and that the snow's melting as soon as we hit the pavement, so we're able to get our trucks around. That's not the problem. It's just deploying them to the most needed areas.
North of Fort Collins, thousands of Poudre Valley REA customers lost electricity due to downed power lines. The majority of those outages have been restored. Meanwhile, Xcel Energy says a system disturbance in Greeley caused a brief power outage this morning for just under 35,000 customers. The state of Colorado started legally recognizing same-sex relationships today. Clerks across the state are prepared for a potential influx of couples seeking civil unions. 2 counties, Denver and Boulder, got a jump on the process, opening early to issue licenses just after the stroke of midnight. Carrie Lieb and Melissa Fling were among 130 couples who received civil unions in Denver early this morning.
We were going to do it maybe this June, and then I said the other day we didn't want to wait anymore. So like yesterday we're like, I think we should go tomorrow. Yeah.
Denver Mayor Michael Hancock and Congresswoman Diana DeGette joined judges and local clergy in presiding over the scores of civil union ceremonies. About 200 people turned out in Denver to rally for immigration reform despite some wet spring snow today. They gathered at the state capitol. Tens of thousands of people are rallying in dozens of cities across the nation in what has become an annual cry for easing the nation's immigration laws. The major rallies carry a special sense of urgency this year, 2 weeks after a bipartisan group of senators introduced a bill that would bring many of the estimated 11 million living in the U.S. illegally out of the shadows. There's a winter storm warning in effect through the night for the Front Range and Plains, and one in effect for the northern and central mountains until 6. Snow through the night for the Front Range, lows tonight in the teens. Snow also in the mountains this evening. This is KUNC.
All things considered from NPR News, I'm Audie Cornish. I'm Melissa Block, and we begin this hour with the war in Syria and the possibility of U.S. involvement. Today in Damascus, Syrian President Bashar al-Assad used the opportunity of May Day to make a rare public appearance. He visited a power plant and said, "We hope that by this time next year we will have overcome the crisis in our country." Meanwhile, President Obama says his administration is considering a spectrum of options if it can be verified that the Assad regime has in fact used chemical weapons. To talk about those options, I'm joined by 2 Syria analysts, Andrew Tabler, Senior Fellow at the Washington Institute for Near East Policy. Andrew, welcome back.
Thank you.
And also Joshua Landis, who directs the Center for Middle East Studies at the University of Oklahoma. Welcome back to you, Professor Landis.
Pleasure to be with you.
Well, one option on that spectrum that President Obama is talking about would be for the U.S. to go ahead and arm the Syrian rebels. Andrew Tabler, I know in the past you've been a strong advocate for arming the rebel forces. Are you still?
It becomes harder to arm the rebels without mitigating against some of the downsides. If it occurred earlier, it would have been easier. But unfortunately, now we have more extremists who have moved into different areas that are controlled by the opposition. So you can't guarantee that every bullet would not make it in the hands of an extremist. But overall, you could strengthen the mainline nationalist, local, and franchise battalions, and it would help steal them back in. And the reason why I still think that's a good idea, and with groups that we've vetted and we can work with, is because I just don't think this conflict is going to end anytime soon.
And Joshua Landis, Andrew Tabler there is advocating going ahead and arming with some hesitation or some reservations, it sounds like. What's your perspective?
Well, I think the United States should stay out of this. This is a civil war, ethnic civil war, which America cannot adjudicate and we can't solve. The Syrians ultimately have to figure out who they are, if they can live together, and what their national identity is going to be. And if America jumps into the middle, we're going to want to kill the extremists, and we're going to want to destroy the Assad regime, and we're going to be fighting a two-front war in Syria, and we're not going to get the outcomes we want, and we're going to spend a fortune doing it. And, there's got to be one of these wars we just don't get involved in.
Do you see a better path, though, given the tens of thousands who have died in this war with no apparent end in sight?
I don't know whether America can stop the killing, and that's the real sad part of it. I mean, I don't know whether America can solve serious problems.
Andrew Tabler?
I think that we can help put a cap on Bashar al-Assad using the full lethality of his arsenal against the Syrian population. That's what's driven most of the death tolls here.
Joshua Landis, I'd be curious to hear your perspective as somebody who married into what I gather is a prominent Syrian Alawite family. Alawites are the minority in Syria, party of President Assad and other elites. Help us understand the Alawite perspective on the rebel movement and the future of their country.
Well, as I said, this is a ethnic war, and it's devolving increasingly towards minorities, who are 20% of Syria, led by the Alawites, 12%, who have monopolized the military and security forces. They have had their foot on the throats of the Sunni Arab majority for the last 40 or 50 years. The Sunni Arab majority has finally had enough of this, and they're trying to overthrow this regime. If we get into Syria and get a Sunni win by arming up the rebels, then the question is, what happens to the defeated minority? Will they be ethnically cleansed? Will they... We don't know what can happen to them. But bad things will happen. And that's the problem. I mean, you can just throw some arms at the opposition, which is what Obama is toying with now, because I think the public pressure is getting great. But if you want to win, and the kind of win that would set up a new Syrian state that would be secular, that would get rid of the extremists, that would guarantee rights for minorities, you're going to have to spend a lot of money, and you can't do it by just putting in, an air no-fly zone or something like that. You really have to get involved. There isn't a Syrian opposition army that we trust. We have one general, General Idris, who we've named the high command guy, and the question is, do we give him money? But he's a contractor. He doesn't have an army loyal to him. What he needs is American money and arms, and he will offer those to various militias. There are over 1,000 militias in Syria, who then come, they get his arms, and they go out and do most of the heavy fighting. But that's why it's very difficult to keep the arms from extremists, because the extremists are by far the best organized, best fighters, and they can deliver.
Andrew Tabler, you've been shaking your...
Get rid of the snow. So thick it was. grab the 12, okay.
Pickwick finished up that section with Halls of Columbia on the campus of Madison. Thanks to the band for joining us live today here on the World Cafe.
Hi, I'm Emily Blair, host of All Things Considered here at KUNC. Just wanted to say thank you to everyone who gave during our spring membership drive. Your support makes KUNC uniquely Northern Colorado.
We'll hear from Jack White along with Bobby Long coming up on the World Cafe, supported by your membership, as well as by Computer Renaissance in Fort Collins, offering new and refurbished tablets, desktops, and notebooks, including setup and data transfer, and your choice of Windows 7 or Windows 8. Online at comprenfc.com. Support also provided by Colorado Mountain College in Leadville and Chaffee County, a residential campus offering associate and bachelor degrees, and just for fun classes including social media, German, Italian, knitting, and more. Summer semester begins May 13th. Info at coloradomtn.edu/Leadville. It's 7:45.
That Pickwick session is up at our website, worldcafe.npr.org. Check that out. Here's Jack White from Blunderbuss. This is Love Interruption.
Is on their taxes, so they get no mortgage interest deduction, or it's taxed at a lower rate. So those folks, I think, are unlikely to be affected very much relative to the higher end of the market. So at least what's being talked about now is, many of your listeners in Boston, for example, will certainly feel the effects, but listeners in other parts of the country may not to the same extent of any of these tax changes.
To Clarksville, Tennessee, Bruce is on the line. Hi, Bruce. Thank you for waiting, and welcome to On Point.
Hi, Jane. Thank you. I disagree with everyone when it comes to higher real estate prices.
Okay.
I think they lead to higher rental prices, which lead to more people being homeless. I'm lucky. I'm a homeowner, and my income is from 30 years of working at the same occupation. I would hate to know that selling my home would be my only way to support myself, because it wouldn't last very long. So
let me just say, my wife's family lives in Reading, Pennsylvania. They live in houses that are worth no more than $100,000 a year. Both of them are at retirement age, and I think what you're saying is absolutely important to understand, which is most commentators and many callers come from places that are very, very different from where most Americans live. And I would say that house prices going up is not a pattern everywhere. It's a predominantly coastal pattern. And in other parts of the country where the economy has not recovered, including in places like Tennessee, but I can promise you also in Reading, Pennsylvania, the pattern has been very different. People don't buy homes for appreciation. They buy them to live in them. And you're absolutely right. If my in-laws had not been able to pay off their home with 30-year mortgages, and have that paid off, they wouldn't be in retirement. So I think people do lose track of the value of housing because so many commentators come from places which have a really different experience than where many Americans live.
Bruce, I'm so glad you called. Carl Case.
Well, I'm just thinking of one thing that people haven't mentioned is the incredible lobby and the successful lobbying that's been done by the people involved in this market. I mean, if one thing will slow down, I own one. I mean, I think it's exactly true that a fair number of the baby boomers who are getting up there and empty nesters don't want to leave the towns they grew up to love, and they're buying the cheapest thing that'll get them into town, and that's downsized.
I just have a couple.
Ironically,
okay, Chris, go ahead.
The data suggests actually that on average, people who are over 65, when they
they sell a home and buy another one, the home they buy is more likely to cost more than less.
Yeah.
So even if it may be a smaller home, it's likely to have stronger amenities and greater views and other things. So people historically, ironically, have not traded down. And the data have been fairly consistent. That's even into their 80s.
Given everything you know, you study this stuff all the time. If you were buying a home now, if you were an investor, where in America would you buy?
I'd buy the house I live in. I would. I mean, I just think this is a great area. It's one of Chris's superstar cities. It's expensive. I was lucky enough to buy a property early, so I had that equity roll over. So, but there's an awful lot of nice places in this country. It's one of the things that has got us overhoused is land relative to land in other parts of the world is very cheap. So it's a great country.
Chris Mayer, so what happens from here? Prices keep rising? I mean, is this a bubble? Take us 1 year, 2 years, 5 years down the road?
Well, 1, 2, and 5 years are hard to predict because you can, there's a lot going on. I think it's actually easier to predict longer term than it is the cyclical patterns. I think home prices on coastal markets are likely to grow after inflation, 1 to 2%. I think house prices in Midwest and southern markets and in lower income communities are likely to mostly be flat, maybe even fall on an after inflation basis. So I think Chip's point is exactly right for the bulk of people, which is if you're thinking about buying a home, buy a home you really want to live in, where you love the community. And don't buy a home with the expectation of getting a very large capital gain, because historically most of the return over your lifetime in a home is going to come from living in it. And that's the biggest return, and that's the stability associated with home ownership. And then you don't have to worry very much about other things, and take out a mortgage you can afford.
Got it.
Is not going to put you under the table if something goes wrong.
Carol Case, you get the last word here.
Well, I just think the thing to watch these days is that housing starts number, because that's going to have the impact on the economy. And if it continues to hang around 1 million, it's not going to be good. It needs to go up a little more than that. It's real GDP. It's real economic activity, and it's giving us hope that this recovery we're in is not temporary.
Thank you both for helping us understand these complex issues. Christopher Mayer, joining us from New York City, professor of real estate and finance and economics at Columbia University. Appreciate your time, Chris. Thanks.
Thanks, Jane.
And Carl Case, professor emeritus of economics at Wellesley, co-creator of the Case-Shiller Index. So great to see you. Thank you.
You're the best. Thanks.
I'm Jane Clayson in for Tom Ashbrook. This is On Point.
Point is a production of WBUR Boston and NPR.
Support for On Point comes from WBUR Boston, the Museum of Science Boston, committed to promoting engineering and technological literacy in grades K-12 nationwide. More information at mos.org/NCTL. The Langlois Foundation, supporting innovative health and mental health programs for underserved populations at langlois.org. And the Cy Sims Foundation, supporter of the Cy Sims School of Business and Executive MBA program at Yeshiva University. This is